I'm Ileana Chan from Empire Watch. And I do have to say, very quickly, a very, very thank you, a heartfelt thank you to the Friends of Socialist China for organizing this wonderful event. It is, yes. For those of you who don't know, they have a website where they post multiple articles a week, co-edited by Carlos Martinez and Keith Bennett on socialistchina.org. So please go over there, sign up for the mailing list, check out the social media. And we are also streaming live after some technical difficulties on their YouTube channel at Friends of Socialist China, and also on Empire Watch. So thank you all for watching live. Okay, so I asked my dad, actually, what should I say for my closing remarks for this conference? And he gave me a few sentences, so I'm just going to read them out. He says, China endured a century of humiliation at the hands of the Western powers and emerged to face a world threatened by fascism, which it joined the world to defeat. Yet after this victory, for over 20 years, it was not even deemed worthy to be considered a nation. Instead, was left in the limbo of being a non-entity, embargoed and boycotted by the US and Imperial West, and still, China was able to dig itself out of this pit of misery and emerge as an inspiration and hope for the world. So thanks, Dad. But this did actually make me think on a more personal note about how my mother used to talk about growing up in the Philippines as someone who is ethnically Chinese. And she used to say that she was always made to feel ashamed to be Chinese because China was so impoverished and underdeveloped, excuse me, and underdeveloped at that time. The whole world looked down on China. We first went back to China in 1990, and we've been back every decade since. So for us to witness the incredible progress and development of China, I have to say it's a very, very profound and deep experience. And so now my mom says, if you're Chinese, you can hold your head up high. You can be proud to be Chinese. But for me, it is more than just about being Chinese. It is more than just about China. Because I don't think that my mother's experience is particularly unique. Imperialism tells the global South that they are less than, that their underdevelopment and impoverishment is because of their inherent inferiority. The empire says, you are the jungle, we are the garden. You can try to cultivate a garden, but you're definitely not going to succeed, and you're not going to ever surpass us. You will always be in our control and power, and we will always be able to take whatever we want from you and do whatever we want to your people. And that's the significance of China's rise, because China proves empire wrong. And they didn't have to emulate the West either. They forged their own path. Yes, they learned lessons from the West, both good and bad, but they forged their own path, and they proved through sovereignty and socialism that you can indeed dig yourself out of a pit of misery. And China's commitment to a wider humanity, as Xi Jinping said in his Victory Day speech, humanity rises and falls together. And this is absolutely key to this new multilateral world that is on the horizon. And finally, this year, I am actually seeing people awaken to this reality. However, I have to say, and this is why I'm so honored to be on this stage, even though I'm nervous with public speaking, because the people that have been speaking here today and Friends of Socialist China, I mean, I will not name names, but a lot of these people have been on the right side of history for decades. They have had the foresight, the intelligence, and the integrity to be ahead of the curve, despite the barrage of gaslighting from empire. So thank you so much, everyone who spoke here and everyone that's part of Friends of Socialist China. And by that same token, I am absolutely honored to introduce our last four speakers, last but not least, starting with Gearóid Ó Machail.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Comrades and friends, dúsbaire bhhaile marag mór nanar dú Lord living you ag an criniú táchtach seo tá ástail a card in the China socially. Sorry, a couple of words in my native tongue in recognition of the wonderful victory of kneecap here in your capital city yesterday. It's a great honour to address you today at this important gathering of esteemed company hosted by my dear friends and comrades in Friends of Socialist China. I bring warm revolutionary greetings from the Communist Party of Ireland, and I express our deep solidarity with the People's Republic of China, with the Chinese people, with the Communist Party of China, and with all you friends of Socialist China. The Communist Party of Ireland deeply values its fraternal relations with the Communist Party of China. These ties are not transactional, they're built on mutual respect, shared ideological foundations, and a commitment to building socialism in our respective contexts. Over the 46 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations between our countries, China and Ireland have deepened exchanges and cooperation across politics, economy, science and technology, and culture, bringing tangible benefits to both peoples, though mostly ours, it must be said. We meet here at a time when the achievements of Chinese socialism are not only undeniable, but are increasingly vital to the future of human civilization and the survival of our delicate global ecosystem. From lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty to leading the world in green development and technological innovation, China stands as a beacon of what is possible when a proud and a resilient people chart their own course, guided by socialist principles and a commitment to national sovereignty. As an Irish comrade, I'm struck by some of the historical parallels between our two nations. Both Ireland and China have endured the long shadow of imperialism. While we have yet to win the Irish people to socialism, we, like our comrades in the PRC, have fought a long, hard struggle for national liberation. Both our countries continue to face the task of national reunification, China with Taiwan, and Ireland with the 6 counties of the northeast still under British occupation and imperialist rule. Ireland remains trapped in a triple lock of imperialism, with a comprador capitalist class subservient to the economic and increasingly militaristic diktats of London, Brussels, and Washington. We suffer under British colonial occupation of our national territory, as I've said, in the northeast, making us an unwilling NATO member at a very dangerous time to be part of that expansionist alliance. The Republic of Ireland's economic policy is subjugated to the needs of both the neoliberal orthodoxies of a resurgent German-led European empire via the EU and via US-dominated foreign direct investment. Sovereignty and anti-imperialism are not therefore merely geopolitical or historical questions. They are questions of dignity, of human rights and of justice, and they remind us that the struggle against imperialism is not a relic of the past. It is a living, ongoing reality. Our comrades in the People's Republic of China know this all too well. Recently, they celebrated the 80th anniversary of their glorious victory over the fascistic Japanese forces and their contribution to the defeat of fascism in the Second World War that we've heard so much about this afternoon. Today, we celebrate China's 76th National Day, and we commemorate Chairman Mao's formal proclamation of the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. Since my first visit to China as a guest of the International Department of the CPC in 2023 with Friends of Socialist China and other Communist Party leaders from North America, Oceanic and Nordic countries, I have returned twice of my own volition, in 1924 and again this year. These journeys have taken me far beyond the conference halls and urban centres, deep into the heart of China's diverse provinces. I visited Henan, Beijing, Shanxi, Guizhou, Guangxi and Guangdong. My visits have left a profound impression on me. I witnessed firsthand the dynamism of Chinese society, the seriousness with which the CPC approaches governance, and the deep-rooted pride of the Chinese people in their socialist path. My visits to the PRC have only deepened my appreciation for the scale and ambition of China's development, whether in economic and technological progress, rural revitalization, ecological protection, public service development, or international solidarity. China is not simply reacting to global challenges, it's shaping the very future of our world. I walked through bustling cities, quiet towns, and remote mountain villages. In each of those, I marveled at the progress made by the people of China. Not only, as I say, in technological and infrastructural development, which is incredible to see, but in ecological restoration, education and healthcare access, and appreciation of cultural diversity and the dignity of everyday life. Everywhere I went, I was greeted as a comrade. In May 2025 of this year, I attended the Canton International Trade Fair in Guangzhou, where traders and buyers from every corner of the globe gather twice a year to forge new commercial ties with China's innovative manufacturers. So much for imperialism's attempts to curtail Chinese commerce and trade and to hinder the extraordinary economic growth of the People's Republic with tariffs and economic warfare. As we have heard from many previous speakers, China's foreign policy, rooted in peaceful development and win-win cooperation, offers a stark contrast to the aggressive militarism and economic coercion practiced by the imperialist powers. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, China is building infrastructure, fostering development, and offering alternatives to the neoliberal model that has failed so many countries in every other continent. Recently, China commemorated the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression and the World Anti-Fascist War. The Second World War is often marked in the West by Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939. Yet on September the 18th, 1931, the Chinese people fired the first shot of resistance against Japanese aggression in northeast China, marking the beginning of the Eastern Front. China's war of resistance against Japanese aggression was the earliest, longest, and most costly campaign of the global anti-fascist war. China's victory on the Eastern Front prevented Japanese militarism from joining forces with European fascists, making a vital contribution to the final victory. As Comrade Francisco reminded us earlier, having endured war, China understands its cost. China is the only major country to enshrine peaceful development in its constitution and the charter of its ruling party, elevating it to a national commitment. China has never initiated a war, never occupied an inch of foreign territory, is the only major nuclear country to pledge no first use of nuclear weapons, and remains the largest contributor of peacekeepers among permanent members of the UN Security Council, as well as the second largest financial contributor to UN peacekeeping operations. The CPC's role in the international communist movement is vital. It has shown that socialism is not only viable, it is vibrant, adaptive, and capable of delivering real results for working people. In doing so, it has inspired parties and movements across the globe. In November, the Communist Party of Ireland will send two of our most promising young party activists, Fionn Wallace, whose father you heard speak earlier, and Liz Martin, to the People's Republic for the World Socialism Forum, organised by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. We as a party are keen to advance the work of Friends of Socialist China, by connecting our party comrades with party activists and policy makers in China in order that they can better understand socialism with Chinese characteristics and China's attempts to build a modern, prosperous socialist country for the 21st century. Beyond diplomacy and party relations, the people-to-people links between Ireland and China are also of growing importance. Cultural exchanges, educational cooperation, and grassroots solidarity help build understanding and break down the caricatures and misinformation so often peddled by Western media. These human connections are the lifeblood of internationalism. They remind us that solidarity is not abstract. It is built through relationships, through shared experiences, and through mutual respect. It is also important that as friends of Socialist China, we combat imperialist propaganda and widespread misconceptions and misunderstandings propagated by state and corporate media institutions in what has become derogatively now referred to as the West. As Martin O'Kane, the great Irish language poet and socialist Republican, once said, "The language of the people is the language of truth." And truth is what we must continue to speak, especially in the face of rising anti-China hysteria. In this regard, the work carried out by Friends of Socialist China is invaluable. You have created a space where truth can be spoken, where analysis can be deepened, and where solidarity can be practiced. You help us understand China not as a threat, but as a partner in the global struggle for peace, development, and socialism. And for that, you have our deepest thanks. Comrades, the road ahead will not be easy. The forces of reaction are mobilizing. The contradictions of capitalism are sharpening. But in China's example, we see hope. We see the possibility of a world not ruled by profit, but guided by the needs of its people. Let us not leave this conference merely informed, but mobilized. Let us return to our communities, our unions, our parties, and our classrooms with renewed commitment to telling the truth about China and defending the achievements of socialism. Let us challenge the lies of imperialism wherever they appear, in the media, in Parliament, or in everyday conversation. Let us support the work of Friends of Socialist China, not just with words, but with actions, by sharing their materials, attending their events, and amplifying their voice. And above all, let us remember that the struggle for socialism is global. The victories of the Chinese people are victories for all of us. Their challenges are our challenges. Their future is bound up with ours and ours with theirs. As our esteemed and martyred Marxist leader, that great internationalist, Commandante James Connolly, reminded us on the eve of the outbreak of the First World Imperialist War, we serve neither king nor Kaiser. Today we serve neither empire nor capital, but the cause of socialism, the dignity of nations, and the unity of peoples. Let us deepen our understanding of Chinese socialism. Let us stand together in the fight for a better world in solidarity with Socialist China. Long live the People's Republic of China. Long live the Chinese Revolution. And long live international socialism. Gearóid Ó Machail.
That was a wonderful comradely speech of solidarity from Gearóid Ó Machail, National Executive Committee member of the Communist Party of Ireland. Gearóid does have a train to catch, so if he runs off, it is not because he's lacking in solidarity. But now it's also my pleasure to introduce Aswathi Asok, Executive Committee member of the Association of Indian Communists.
Thank you, Chair. And dear comrades and friends, so on this 76th foundation event of the People's Republic of China, I am honored to be here today with you all and bring greetings from the Association of Indian Communists, the overseas wing of the Communist Party of India, Marxist. As someone who was born and raised in a neighboring country of China, it is with immense pride and joy that I join you to celebrate a victory that continues to inspire working people, still continues to inspire the working people across the world. As we all know, the Chinese Revolution of 1949 was more than a change of government. It showed that the oppressed can rise, organize, and shape their own future. Dear friends, it feels like a poetic justice that today we gather here in London, the heart of the old colonial empire, to celebrate the resilience of a nation that defied colonialism and imperialism. As someone else mentioned, from the Opium Wars to the century of humiliation, Western powers tried to break China, and even today they continue to do so. Yet China stands unbroken, emerging as a beacon of sovereignty and socialist development. As everyone else mentioned today, the China's development path was never smooth. After centuries of wars and invasion, it had to feed and educate hundreds of millions. But the scale of transformation the country has achieved in this short span of 76 years is undeniable, not only in terms of economic growth, but in advances in health, education, and social equality. For those of us who struggle for an equitable and just social order, these are not abstract statistics. They are living proof that a society that led by workers and peasants can plan, build, and rise without bowing to the dictates of imperial powers. From the earliest days onwards, progressive movements in India looked to the Chinese people's bravery with admiration and with a sense of kinship. Even before the People's Republic was proclaimed, there were bonds of solidarity. During the Chinese people's war of resistance against Japanese aggression, an Indian doctor, Dwaraganath Kotnis, he traveled to China with a team of Indian physicians to serve the wounded. Dr. Kotnis is still remembered in China with deep affection and as a symbol of internationalist fraternity. Rabindranath Tagore, the Nobel laureate and India's national poet, gave another expression to this friendship. When he first set his foot in China in 1924, he noted with emotion that, "I do not know why coming to China seems to me like returning to my native soil." After India's independence from the British colonial rule, India's Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru sought to nurture this fraternity. Together with Comrade Zhou Enlai, he gave the world the Panchashil principles of peaceful coexistence. The popular slogan in the 1950s of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, which means India and China are brothers, captured the spirit of that time when two ancient civilizations emerging from colonial rule envisioned a future of cooperation and non-alignment. That vision of fraternity is even more relevant today, as we are facing new threats from Western powers, especially US imperialism, through tariff wars and policies designed to weaken and divide the global South. This is a time that calls for unity among the nations of the global South to resist such authoritarian impositions. As two countries that jointly represent more than one-third of the world's population, India and China together should be able to lead such a solidarity. Sadly, the present right-wing government in India under Narendra Modi, they does not recognize this imperative need. Instead, the government chooses to subjugate our country, India, to the dictates of Trump and Washington. As we have heard several times today, China's own path shows that power need not be built on threats and conquest. Unlike the old imperialist forces that grew rich through centuries of war and plunder, China has risen to global prominence without invading others and without building a network of military bases. Its strength comes from the commitment of its people, its inclusive development trajectory, advancement in science and technology, and lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. Dear friends, now let me share a very personal note. I come from Kerala, a southernmost state in India, where a communist government came to power through ballot for the first time in the history. I grew up in a tradition where in many homes, the photograph of Chairman Mao still hangs on the wall, not as a decoration, but as a reminder that ordinary people can make history. Like China achieved development success when compared to other countries in a similar stage, Kerala's record stands far higher than most Indian states and is even comparable to many economically advanced nations. I am proud to say that Kerala's achievements, marked by universal literacy, strong public health systems, decentralized planning, and eradication of extreme poverty, were shaped in part by lessons we learned from China. We can draw many parallels between the Chinese model and the Kerala model. Just as China created an alternative development path in a world dominated by neoliberalism and finance capital, Kerala has opened its own path within the constraints of federalism and bourgeois democracy. The success stories of both China and Kerala prove a very fundamental socialist principle, that even under every challenge, it is possible to put human needs before private profit. Comrades, the world today is threatened by wars and aggression carried out by imperial forces, by unjustifiable trade wars, by the rise of the far right, and by the re-emergence of racism and anti-immigrant sentiments. We are facing cost of living crisis, climate injustices, and deep economic instability. In such a moment, forging unity among the working class, the oppressed, and all those who face imperial aggression and exploitation is a necessity for peace and human survival. We must resist the propaganda that demonizes China, we must speak clearly for Palestine, and we must stand with Cuba. Also, we must defend the right of every nation to choose its own path of development without coercion. As Comrade already mentioned here, we should also remember that independence of one socialist country is not enough in a world where imperialism seeks to divide, dominate, and exploit. The liberation of the working class in India and in the UK is bound up with the liberation of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So let us build a world where working people everywhere enjoy dignity, equality, and peace. Let us carry forward the banner of socialism with courage, unity, discipline, and hope. And I believe China, with its rich experience, will support and lead the awakening of the working class across the globe. We salute all who sacrificed for the Chinese Revolution and all who continue the work of building a socialist society. On behalf of the Indian working class and peasantry, the Association of Indian Communists extend our hands in friendship and in struggle to all who strive for a fairer, just and peaceful world. The people united shall never be defeated. Solidarity and revolutionary greatness.
Thank you so much, Aswathi. I do hope that we are seeing the beginnings of Indian-China brotherhood again as part of the family of the wider humanity. And now we have the last speaker, but definitely not the least, Robert Griffiths, from the he's the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Britain. Take it away.
My first task is to bring you greetings from the Communist Party of Britain and its members, its executive committee, and apologies that 50 of our leading trade union comrades are at a residential school this weekend at the General Federation of Trade Unions hotel in Loughborough. Were it not for that, I'm sure quite a few of them would be able to be with us today. My third task, comrades, is to cross out most of the notes that I'd made in preparation for this speech, because so much of it has been said before, more expertly in many cases than I could possibly have said it. We've heard, for example, about China in the struggle for peace. Including, if we go back just a few decades, the way in which China has not so much been rewritten out of history, but the role that China played in the global struggle against fascism was never written in the first place. It hasn't been rewritten. It's been written out from the beginning, from 1949. And yet China played such a critical role, not just in the struggle in the Far East, but contributing so much to the ability of the Soviet Union, another country, of course, whose role in the Second World War has been rewritten and to some extent even written out of history in the West, enabled the Soviet Union to play its absolutely central role in the defeat of fascism in the West. After the Second World War, of course, we had the Cold War. And with the Cold War, based as it was on the biggest lie of the 20th century, which was that the Soviet Union, after losing 27 million people and having to rebuild literally thousands of cities, towns and villages, together with playing a key role in rebuilding the devastated parts of Poland, Czechoslovakia and Eastern Germany, nevertheless was just champing at the bit to invade Western Europe and have another world war. That was the big lie that was used to justify, of course, the formation of NATO. And then on top of that, after 1949 in particular, we were fed a slight variant on that big lie, but still a big lie in itself, that the Red Peril in the East also threatened peace and stability across that part of the world. And with the formation of NATO, of course, since then, ever since then, even after the winding up of the Warsaw Pact, NATO, which was established 6 years before the Warsaw Pact, NATO has continued to expand, and in tandem with the European Union, all the way eastwards to the very borders of Russia. And while I mention the European Union, let's also not forget, this is for the benefit of any Guardian readers there may be with us today, some of whom have some very strange ideas that the European Union was a wonderful construction in the interests of peace and international cooperation. It should be recalled that the first attempts to establish pan-Western European organizations were first of all the attempt to establish a European defense community, as they called it, in Western Europe, clearly aimed at Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and also, in addition to that, the European political community to go with it, that was only defeated by the joint forces of the French Gaullists and the French Communist Party, who defeated the proposal in the French National Assembly that led to the collapse of the European political community and the end of the moves to establish a European defense community, based incidentally on the rearmament of West Germany. And only after that did those who were so keen to establish this anti-socialist bloc in Western Europe, only after that did they decide to go at it from a different direction, to begin with economic cooperation and economic structures instead of political and military structures. They would follow, of course, as they have been doing over the last 20 years, and we've seen the acceleration in the militarization of the European Union, working so closely now in tandem with NATO. And yet, when it comes to questions of peace and war, our headlines are not filled with these realities. We're warned about Chinese expansionism. China, which has one military facility outside its own borders, no military bases as such. It's China that is the expansionist power that threatens peace and stability, not the United States, with hundreds of military bases around the world, including those that encircle 2/3 of the borders of China, not NATO, which has expanded, as I say, all the way eastwards, including the new military bases that have been constructed. But it's China. And why? Because the Chinese Navy has been spotted sailing in the South China Sea, which everybody knows is the property of the US Sixth Fleet. That's where you will find the British, American and Australian warships engaging in annual military exercises off the coast of China. And yet we're told it's China that is the expansionist power and that threatens peace and stability. And incidentally, of course, again, just to insert a dose of reality here, if one just compares China's military expenditure by any measurement you like, percentage of GDP, amount spent per head of population, amount spent in total, is still only a fraction of American military expenditure, about 1/5 by most of those measures. And yet again, it's China that we're warned is on the warpath. How extraordinary, and what a complete inversion of the real situation. Although let's give President Trump some credit. He has decided to rename his department the Ministry of War instead of the Ministry of Defense. I think it's probably the only time that Trump has been caught out telling the truth about anything in the last 12 months. We've heard today marvelous contributions about China's role in international solidarity, about the assistance it's given and the solidarity that it's giving to Cuba, to Venezuela. Let's not also forget the increasingly warm relations now with Vietnam, playing an important role in financing projects in Vietnam. And of course, we've heard today about the Belt and Road Initiative. We've heard about its role in BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and so on. And let's not forget the increasing role that China has been playing in the United Nations, the way in which it has been supporting the different peacekeeping operations by the UN around the world, the way in which it stepped in to fill the funding gap left by the United States in terms of development aid. And this also should remind us, we need to be very careful as friends of China, as progressives, as socialists, as communists. We need to be very careful not to join in the general rubbishing of the United Nations. That is part of the United States and imperialism's agenda. Ever since the United States lost the ability to bribe and bully the majority of member states in the General Assembly, up until that time, the United States supported all kinds of operations as far as the United Nations were concerned, because they could bribe and bully the majority in the General Assembly. They can't do that anymore. They lose vote after vote in the General Assembly, and therefore they have to increasingly use their veto. And of course, it's been a quite conscious, deliberate policy of the United States, wherever necessary to serve imperialism's interests, to sideline and to undermine the authority and the resources and the potential role of the United Nations. So we should be very careful in our disappointment, of course, in terms of what the United Nations has been unable to do and cannot do. We should be very careful that we don't slide over to imperialism's agenda and say, well, the United Nations, it's all a waste of time, it's a paper tiger, it's finished. That is exactly what the United States wants us to conclude. And instead of weakening the United Nations, we should be looking at the ways in which it can be strengthened and the ways in which resources can be increased. And of course, linked to that, the kind of practical demands that can be put on the United Nations, including those that expose the real role of American and Western imperialism generally. We've heard as well today about other aspects of internationalism, and Gearóid, just before he went, he compelled me to cross out another couple of lines of my original notes. But he did mention the growing role of the Communist Party of China in the international communist movement. Every year there is an international meeting of communist and workers' parties. It's the biggest gathering of communists and their parties in the world, outside possibly of Keith Bennett's annual birthday parties. We have 80, 90, 100 communist parties and workers' parties and national liberation movements. We meet, we exchange views, we sign statements of solidarity and so on. We've even been coordinating more activities in recent years. And China's role in that, the role of the Chinese party in that, has been growing and growing and growing. And they've taken on more positions and more responsibilities. And that's very much to be welcome. And by the way, I think it should be noted as well that at those meetings and in its relations with communist parties around the world, the Chinese party treats other parties strictly on the basis of equality of status, mutual respect, non-interference in the internal affairs of other parties. And so even the smaller communist parties, like ours in Britain, we get treated with the same consideration, on the same basis and with the same respect as some of the mass communist parties around the world also enjoy. So the Chinese communists stick very strictly to those principles of relations between communist parties in the same way that they do in terms of relations between countries. And I think it's important, of course, that continues. We've heard about China's enormous advances in the field of science, in the fields of science and technology. Green, sustainable development. I couldn't help but notice, if any of you had the unfortunate experience to endure the speech that Trump delivered at the United Nations just recently, he actually made mention of China's role in the manufacture and export of the dreaded windmill. Terrible, terrible things Trump told the leaders of the other countries at the UN. Don't forget, a windmill has been erected within sight of his Scottish golf course. And he is not going to forgive those responsible. But he said, China is quite happy to manufacture and export windmills, as he liked to call them, wind turbines, we also know them as. It exports these on a massive scale, he said, and of course, these terrible things, they're very careful that they don't use them inside China. Well, I'm sorry, we've had some facts and figures before us, but I remember on my first visit to China 20 years ago, on the coach journey into Xinjiang, the Uyghur province, on the outskirts of the capital city, Urumqi, there were miles and miles of wind turbines, windmills, that supplied the whole of that city and the surrounding area with green renewable energy. That was back then. And we've heard today about the extent to which that technology is now being deployed along with solar power across large tracts of China. We've heard about China's enormous advances in terms of its economy and social development and so on. And it's very important, I think I think it was Carlos who made this point very, very strongly. Other speakers have made the point. But let us never forget that such enormous achievements as the elimination of absolute poverty for 800 million people in China has been carried out on the basis of socialism, of a socialist economy, of public ownership of key industries and services, of a centralized economic plan on the basis of strict control and regulation over private capital. And let's not forget as well, on the basis, yes, of Communist Party rule. That's what China has achieved, and that's the basis on which they've achieved it. Not because they've embraced capitalism, which is the Western propaganda version, explanation for China's enormous progress. Of course, China has made use of capital, of private capital. It's made use of market forces, but they've always been subject to the central economic plan. They've also been subject, absolutely, to Chinese state power, with the Communist Party in the ruling position. Lenin would have recognized that strategy, even though he didn't live to see the fruits of it in terms of the stimulation it gave to the development of Russia's economy in the 1920s. And then we have to contrast the enormous achievements. Anybody who's been to the many massive new railway stations, who's been on those high-speed trains, you're going at 180 miles an hour, and there's none of the shaking and so on that you experience just travelling at 60 miles an hour between Cardiff and Bristol. You're going on this high-speed train, and you compare the thousands and thousands of miles of new railway line and the new stations, and you compare that within Britain. I don't think we've managed to build HS2 as far as Birmingham yet, and we've already cancelled the second part of it. What a contrast, what an enormous contrast between socialist China and capitalist Britain. We've also heard today about China's role in terms of promoting human rights. The human rights that actually matter to hundreds of millions of people in developing countries, as well as the democratic rights that, of course, will be and follow along behind that. I remember at a dinner after one international delegation had been to China, and we had a dinner with a leading Politburo member afterwards. And in the middle of the dinner, I was sitting next to him, his mobile phone went off. And he picked up the phone, he had a brief couple of words in Chinese. Unfortunately, my Chinese is a bit rusty, so I couldn't quite follow the conversation. But he was a little bit down. And I said afterwards, was that bad news, comrade? And he said, well, yes, in a way. There have been local elections in my home village, and a close friend of mine was defeated. So I said, what? He was a Communist Party candidate and he's just been defeated in local elections. He said, no, everybody has to stand as an independent. I said, well, why is that? He said, because if they stood as Communist Party candidates, they'd almost certainly be elected. That is the prestige of the Communist Party of China in many localities. He said, my close friend was an independent, he's been defeated, and I'm a little bit sad about it. And when we come back to human rights, well, no, before we leave democratic rights, I mean, when we talk about those hundreds of millions in China who've been rescued from absolute poverty, do you think their priority really, in place of that, would have been that they don't have the right to a party led by the Chinese equivalent of Keir Starmer or Nigel Farage or Kemi Badenoch? Of course not. Of course not. What they needed was to be rescued from hunger, from disease, from ignorance. That is what the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese government has delivered for so many people in China. Of course, the expansion of democratic rights, of popular participation, and so on, will continue to take place in China. But why on earth would they want it to take the Western form? The corruption, the big business financing, the outside influences. Why would they want that system? That's not how democracy will develop in China. And before I leave that and come to just my last contribution, the last part of my contribution, of course we're also, whenever we stand up for China and we defend China's record and so on, we're confronted with the hoary old question, but what about genocide in Xinjiang, in the Uyghur province? And stop me if you've heard this before. Looking around, I think some of you have. I went to Xinjiang province just a few years after the first outbreak of Islamic fundamentalist and separatist terrorism. I went to Xinjiang. We went to different places, we met different people, we were quite free to walk around wherever we wanted and so on. And when I got back, one of the first things I did, in those days I must admit, occasionally I did buy The Guardian. When I came back, I opened The Guardian and there was a report from the president of the World Uyghur Congress, set up with American money in the United States, then moved to Germany. The World Uyghur Congress president was addressing the European Parliament, and he was explaining the terrors that were being inflicted upon the Uyghur people in Xinjiang. Their language was being crushed. They weren't allowed to speak it. All the public signs and notices are in Han Chinese only. All the mosques have been closed. And all the officials of the state and the party in the province were all run by Han Chinese imports. That's what the speech said. I'd just been there. Now, either our Chinese comrades had constructed this Potemkin village or province and filled it full of Han Chinese, or I'd actually seen quite a different Xinjiang. We'd gone to the market. Most of the people there were speaking Uyghur. Any public sign and notice, the first language on the sign was Uyghur, followed by Mandarin, or one of the other Chinese languages, usually Mandarin, and then Russian. There's a long-standing small Russian community. Trilingual signs. By the way, we had hundreds of people in Wales imprisoned in the non-violent direct action struggle for bilingual signs in Wales, with the Welsh language on, even in Welsh-speaking areas. But there were these trilingual signs. And what's more, of course we visited mosques that were open. When we met the capital city administration, and when we met the leadership of the Communist Party in Xinjiang Autonomous Region, our interpreters had to stand down that we brought with us from Beijing. Why? They told us why. They said, we don't speak Uyghur, and the Uyghur comrades you're going to meet, they want to speak their own language. We can't translate from Uyghur into English and English into Uyghur, so they're supplying their own translators. Now, we were told by the president of the World Uyghur Congress that all the top officials in local government and the party were all Han Chinese. Of course, a complete load of nonsense. But who in the European Parliament had just come back from Xinjiang like we had? That fraud who was peddling this nonsense, of course, was not challenged by anybody. And it certainly wouldn't be challenged by The Guardian itself. But this is the kind of falsification that is taking place on this enormous scale. The Uyghur people must be the only victims of genocide who see their proportion of the Chinese population and their absolute numbers actually growing from one census to the next. I didn't think that's how genocide was supposed to work. Complete and utter nonsense. But the ideal way in which to counteract that, of course, is to try and go. You can go. Westerners are not prevented from going to Xinjiang. And in fact, the Morning Star had a delegation to Xinjiang quite recently, and its international editor, Roger Mackenzie, wrote a superb series of articles in the Morning Star. This is the reality of Xinjiang. This is what I've seen in Xinjiang. And it doesn't match the Western propaganda in the slightest. So, comrades, not only do we all have a job as ambassadors of China, explaining the realities of China and the great advances being made by China and the internationalism practiced by the Chinese state and government and ruling party, we also have to be travel agents. I know that might be putting Keith and Carlos out of a job, but we need to be encouraging more people, organising delegates. We need to get some more trade unionists out there so we can counteract some of the nonsense being talked on that front. But these are things that we all can do. By the way, I'm a bit obsessed with Guardian readers at the moment. I don't know what that might be. But look, if there's anybody here not reading the Morning Star every day, what paper are you supporting? This is the only national paper that tells the truth about China and is in solidarity with China. And if you're not reading the Morning Star, why not? I'll be checking with the circulation manager at the end of next week. I'll want to know how many new orders have been placed for the Morning Star in newsagents up and down Britain. I hope it's going to be at least 25, 30 or 40. We need to support the paper that supports the work of Friends of Socialist China. So, comrades, I think it's been a wonderful day with absolutely superb contributions. I know there'll be plans to publish some of them. But I would like to end by just saying, long live peace and internationalism. Long live the Communist Party of China. Long live the People's Republic of China.
Thank you so much for that brilliant summation, Robert. Thank you everyone for joining us. And as you can imagine, a lot of people do not have this very useful and important information. So please go to our YouTube channels at Friends of Socialist China and at Empire Watch, and please share the clips that come out. At Friends of Socialist China, we'll have full panels up. And now I think, Carlos, you want to say some parting words?
The main thing is we've run about an hour over time, so let's get out of here. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you so much to all the participants, all the speakers, all the people who've been helping out on the technical side of things, on the logistical side of things. We've had a lovely day, and keep in touch.